Joined again by Vicki McKenna for our Culture Cast segment. Vicki, thanks for being with us this week.
Great to be with you, Duke.
We could spend hours, you and I. We could never, ever leave 40 hours a week alone and talk about what's going on in the Madison Public Schools. But this is kind of a doozy. So usually we expect craziness. We actually have a 30-something male teacher in a high school in the Madison area who has gone back to work like he was ordered to, but he's built his own little, basically, bubble. He's like the boy, he's the teacher in the plastic bubble. So he gets into his bubble. He teaches online to the kids who are sitting not 10 feet away. You can't make this stuff up.
And if you take a look at it, was constructed, right? Someone brought in boards and plastic. The school knew about it. The school knew about it, and they seem to think that this guy treating his kids in his classroom with such utter disregard and so determined to tell the parents who want teachers back in the classroom, well, if you want us back in the classroom, fine, but I'll show you, and I will treat your kids like they do not matter, because the only thing that's important is my union's position on this. And so this is what this guy has decided to do to make a point. He's 30-ish.
This is a temper tantrum. It is a complete, and go back to the picture one more time, Mike. This is a temper tantrum, but it's more than a temper tantrum. He is actually scapegoating his children for being disease-ridden little mongrels. He's treating his kids as if they're dirty. I mean, this guy is a piece. You ever watch Seinfeld? Remember the boy in the plastic bubble from? The only thing I have to say about this is moops. Moops. We're gonna start calling this guy Moops. Which high school is this?
Let's call him Mr. Moops. This is McFarland High School. McFarland High School in Dane County, so right next door to Madison. But here's the thing, Duke. It's not. I was talking to a couple of folks I know who are teaching very quietly, keeping it on the down low, that they're conservatives and they're teaching in other public schools in Wisconsin. One gal who teaches in West Allis, near Milwaukee, says that in her school, teachers are hanging shower curtains with binder clips from the ceiling, and the teacher is going into the shower stall and then teaching virtually while the kids are sitting in the classroom. Again, to make a point, this is about telling the teachers and the administrators and whoever else supports having those kids back in the classroom, will show you. And you're right. It is using children. It is using kids as a political weapon, as a means to an end, without any regard whatsoever for their education, for their experience, for their mental health. I mean, to tell a bunch of kids that they're nothing more than a bunch of diseased vermin by behaving that way, that can't be good for mental health. Not that anybody seems to give a damn about that now.
Now, this is fascinating. These kids, if this were a typical day in a Madison school and everything was normal, COVID had gone away, they'd be learning about how white people are evil. They'd be learning about how they've got to become anti-racist and fight their whiteness. Whiteness is a disease, all those little white kids. And I'll bet you this is a very white district outside of Dane County, right in the cusp of Dane County there. Mostly white kids, I guarantee you. And they would be talking about what racial parasites they are, how unworthy of what they have they are. And now they come to school, right, after COVID. And what have these kids done? They've been literally treated like they're plague-carrying pariahs. I mean, I said this to you before. When you think about what happened in the 1930s in Germany, when you think about what the Nazis, I hate to be the guy to go there. Hey, if Alyssa Milano can call the Hyatt hotels Nazi hotels simply for hosting the CPAC, then we can go to the Nazi well once in a while. If you go back to the early 1930s, this is exactly what the Nazis did with children. They actually taught them that Jews were like rats carrying vermin. They separated themselves from the Jewish plague. They berated the Jewish race to all the other kids in the class. They scapegoated Judaism. How is this different than any of that?
I don't think it's different, except that we don't have concentration camps and gas chambers. That's how it's different. But ideologically, the book burning, the digital book burning that you go on, that you see, the relegation of everybody who is not a woke progressive into that, that sort of a non-human category, unpersoned category. Ideologically, these are, at the worst, they're kissing cousins. They're just, the fact that we have no one pushing back on it, except for a handful of parents who, quite frankly, don't want to put their names to their objections because they fear what's going to happen to their kids, or they fear what's going to happen to them and their jobs if they actually are identified in pushing back against this craziness. It's pretty terrifying how easily the left is going to win this war, this long war, because we are already too terrified to actually stand together and say enough.
Yeah, and you're right, exactly right. In 33 and 34 and 1935 and 1936, there weren't camps yet in Germany, and there weren't gas chambers yet. What they had was the rhetoric. Before you could actually burn books, before you can burn people, you got to burn books. Before you can burn books, you've got to convince generations of people, particularly the young, that it literally is possible to be sick, evil, and wicked just because of your skin color. I think the analogy really holds well. And on top of everything else, Vicki, these teachers are in non-compliance. The point of this whole thing is that they were ordered back into the classroom to teach their kids face-to-face in a classroom setting. So all these shower curtains that teachers are hiding behind, the moops guy hiding behind his plastic bubble, then teaching virtual classroom, they are completely non-compliant. They're not teaching kids. They've just taken the Zoom, the online Zoom, and they've done it all in one classroom.
Right. You're still learning virtually. You're just doing it in one room together. You're not allowed to sit next to each other, talk to each other. You have to have a mask on, put your earbuds in, stare at your screen while your teacher, who's a couple of feet away, is behaving like he's some kind of monk-like character and is worried about germs. Now, listen, what stuns me as well is that the reaction wasn't to send, let's say, 10 parents, send their kids to McFarland High School with instructions, tear that damn thing down. Because that's what my dad would have done. Mm-hmm. My dad would have said, you know what, Vicki, when you're going into that classroom, the first thing you're going to do is get there a little bit early and you're going to tear that down. And if you get in trouble, I'll help you out. But parents won't empower their kids to do that because parents are too afraid of the teachers union coming back against their kids in order to harm the parents, which has been happening all the time. And you mentioned non-compliance. The schools have been in non-compliance for decades at this point. Look at the proficiency scores, and I don't want to go here again, but when you have fewer than 40% of kids proficient in reading and math, when we have already lowered standards on what proficient means, and on top of that, you have this now where you're going to have kids missing entire years of the already dumbed down education system. I've been telling people, listen, you get activated. Become someone who is willing to push for vouchers for all. And better than that, be someone who is willing to actually, be willing to live with a little less stuff and homeschool your kids. Find a way to live with less stuff and take your kids out of these miserable, toxic, weird, warped, bent environments so that your kids can actually read, understand, critically think, and do mathematics to the point where they might be able to compete.
Yeah, and it's worse than that, too. Not only are they not in conformity, they are not complying with what they're supposed to do. They've also decided now over the last year or two that compliance is white supremacy. So if we give in and actually start paying attention to our kids' grades, if we give in and acknowledge that our job is to teach reading, writing, and math and not critical race theory, then we're going to have to confront our own failure. And rather than confront our utter inability and unwillingness to teach primarily minority kids how to read, that would fall back on us. So now it's all white privilege. I thought of something else, Vicki, that I think is really shameful. And I wonder if this wouldn't be ground for a collective lawsuit. So the teacher who is so threatened by the possibility of being sick thinks that it's so dangerous. He walls himself off, Mr. Moops, but he does not wall off each individual desk. So he's concerned about his own plague, getting the plague, but he doesn't care if his kids get it at all. His kids are sitting table to table. There's no shower curtains around each desk. If this guy was really concerned about his kids, he wouldn't just wall himself off. He would have walled all of them off. And it shows you on the SS Titanic that is the American public school system, it's not women and children first. It's it's lazy, crapulent white guys named Moops who get protected first. Nobody else.
You can see him, right? You can see him pretending.
Can't you?
So he could get on the lifeboat while the kids are, stuck and drowning. That's with right. The Titanic. Which is true, though. Duke, you mentioned minority kids. In Madison schools, fewer than 10%, so just a little bit north of 9% of Black children can read and do math at grade level. That is a consistent number for the last about a decade at least, and that's when I was starting, to pay attention to the proficiency numbers. The same is true in Milwaukee schools. 9%, 91% of Black children in Madison schools, in Dane County public schools, can't read or do math at grade level. And so what do the teachers do? They pretend that education itself is racist. And so instead of doing something about the 91% who are failing so that they don't fail, we want to make the other kids who aren't failing fail in order to make everything about equity. And equity is only equality in failure. But that's the ideology of the teachers. Their ideology comes first. Now, I know that there are some good teachers out there. I don't need to say that. But in terms of it as a group, you have got people who are not there to do any job other than indoctrinate children. If they can't, if they are being called out on the phony performance art that they are calling education, then what they are going to do is simply change the definition of education. But you have kids, most kids in the Madison schools who are Black, cannot read, cannot do math at grade level, and most of them are actually functionally illiterate if you actually do a deeper dive into those scores that's put out by DPI. So, this is not a group of people. This is not an institution. This is not a government-funded institution or a profession that actually is about what they claim, which is education.
This is absolutely right. This is kabuki education. It's shadows. And it's even, I'll go and take it one step further to what you said again. Think about this. Not only are the Black and Hispanic kids are at the bottom of the totem pole here. Black kids in particular, they can't read. They're in Los Angeles County. 80% of young African-American boys up to the age of 18 are functionally illiterate. 80% of them in Los Angeles schools. Madison's not much better. And the thing that gets me about this is, what does this critical race theory do? It comes along and says, okay, the worst performing kids are African-American. The best performing kids are Asian. Well, that's racism. The fact that Asians are doing well and Blacks are doing poorly, both of those things are white supremacy. And so how do we fix this? We no longer require learning. We pretend that math itself is bigoted. Empirical evidence, showing your math during a problem on a test, that now is white supremacy. And guess what happens? Not only do you level the playing field, as you were saying, by everybody equally miserable, you actually exalt the Black students above the white students because the Black kids are morally pure. The white kids are inherently tainted. So not only do you level the playing field and get rid of mathematics and educational standards, all of a sudden, Black kids that become not just the smart ones, they become the victims, they become the heroes, they become the narrative writers, and everybody else suffers for it. And I don't know how the poor Asians got stuck on this boat, but their success is white supremacy too.
Right, even though they're not white, right? Right as you were talking, I quickly took a peek and found the numbers of Black students in Madison schools that are functionally illiterate. We define that as B. It is called below basic. That's the actual phrase that Wisconsin uses. 60%. 60% functionally illiterate. And the idea that exceptional education, well, that's what school choice is all about. That's about taking your kids out of a bad environment and giving your kid an opportunity to actually go to a decent school. Hopefully, crossing fingers, a parochial school with a voucher. That's what that's about. That's about not being willing to accept that functional illiteracy for the vast majority of students is okay. But American public schools have accepted that. And this is what makes me even angrier. This has been going on for decades. And the racial patina on all of this stuff now is a dodge. It's a way to get the teachers union and the failing institution that has become public education. It's a way for them to evade responsibility for all of the failures. And of course, education is a failure because politics is the entire point of education. But you have all of these people, who have been showing for decades that they are not actually willing to do anything to help these children. And what have powerful conservative majorities in Republican-controlled legislatures done, Duke? What did we do when there was an allegedly conservative majority and a Republican governor in Wisconsin? We put Common Core into place. Yep. We did nothing to improve the content of the classroom. We didn't increase the power of the standards. We dumbed down the standards. All we did was, stare at our shoes and say school choice. But we didn't do anything to actually give all kids access to school choice. So even when, I see Governor Walker is griping about snowflakes, the generation of snowflakes coming out of American schools. Well, you had an opportunity that was 2010. Those snowflakes he's talking about would have been graduated from college by now. And if he'd have actually paid any attention to what was going on in the classroom, those snowflakes might not be worthy of derision from this governor.
Well, it's kind of ironic that after Act 10, Governor Walker sort of turned into a snowflake, didn't he? He kind of melted away. And put that picture up there one last time, Mike. This boy in the plastic bubble teacher is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for American public schools across the board. They would rather hunker down, insulate themselves, wear great big plastic condoms to keep them away from the kids that they're supposed to teach than to be responsible in any way, shape, or form for their inability to teach kids their job, what they're supposed to be able to teach them. It is a failure across the board. Vicki McKenna, thank you for this really important culture cast today. I hope things get better. We'll see.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Most of you know our show is being censored by big tech.
While this makes it harder to meet the cost of producing the show, that's part of it. It also demonstrates that we must be having tremendous success or they wouldn't bother to try to shut us down.
If you like hearing truth and common sense with a love for freedom, please join the Patriot Club with a one-time $99 tax-deductible donation. And you'll get this sweet vessel of joy as part of a thank you for joining the Patriot Club.
Etched with the American flag and the words freedom never tasted so good.
All you have to do is visit patriotclub.us and become a Patriot member today.
That's patriotclub.us. Thank you and God bless.